Tourists of Reddit, what was the most freaked up thing you saw in another country? In the middle of the winter, flying back to Canada from a Caribbean island, a middle-aged man was ready to board the plane with a very thin teenage girl wearing flip-flops, shorts and a poncho. The girl had a shaved head. The man wouldn't let go of her. She was staring at the floor the entire time. Everything looked just odd. The flight attendants were doing all sorts of delaying maneuvers. My family and I were late and boarded right after them. Before the flight took off, the police came into the plane and started asking questions and took the man and girl off the plane. The girl didn't speak any English, Spanish or French. I'm convinced that the airline personnel saved a girl being trafficked into Canada. Human traffic prevention techniques were very thoroughly taught during my flight attendant training. Happy to hear things worked out in this situation. The guy that flashed my friends and I in a very nice park in Central Europe. We were having a picnic. He was very polite about it, saying, "Excuse me girls, I'm just going to masturbate in front of you," and then did so. What a gentleman. Cyprus in the mid-90s. I was 15 and on holiday with my parents. I saw an old Cypriot guy getting beaten within an inch of his life by a young Russian guy after a row over unpaid rent. As I understood it, the Russian was renting an apartment of the victim. Police promptly turned up and dragged the Russian guy into the nearest building. The Cypriot guy was taken to hospital by ambulance, and a short while later the Russian guy was brought out of the building on a stretcher and was also taken to hospital once the police had dealt with him. The Cypriot guy was taken to hospital by ambulance, and a short while later the Russian guy was brought out of the building on a stretcher and was also taken to hospital once the police had dealt with him. Oh man. You can tell I'm from Eastern Europe that I knew this was coming before I even got there. I just read that and thought, yeah, that sounds about right. In a small town in Korea, I saw two guys run out of a restaurant. One of them was holding a 10-inch kitchen knife and shoved it into the other guy's belly. The guy's standing there holding the knife in his gut, and an old lady comes out of the restaurant and starts hitting him in the head with her shoe. Two other guys jumped on the stabber and held him on the ground. Ambulance came and loaded the stabby and drove away. Cops came and drove the stabber away. Restaurant owner came out with a bucket of water and washed the blood off his steps. Turned out it was a wedding party and there was a bit of a disagreement. You're supposed to cut the cake, not the cousin. I was hearing an argument happen in an apartment complex between a couple, and then I heard a gunshot, and then silence. This was in Venezuela. My family went to Aruba about 10 years ago and did an island tour that ended at beach where we could see Venezuela from the shore. My mom asked our tour guide if he thought we could do a day trip to Venezuela. He laughed and said, "I'm darker skinned and I wouldn't go there. You wouldn't last an hour." I don't know if I qualify as a tourist, because Barcelona is in my country and not far from my hometown. Anyway, me and my sis were walking down the Ramblas in early afternoon, and the place was packed. A group of American teenagers was using an ATM, and they were taking precautions, because the area is infamous for its pickpockets, so they were not to blame. But as soon as one girl took the banknotes from the ATM, a kid took them from her hand and raced to the adjacent streets. We took the teens to the police precinct, but they weren't very helpful. The first thing they asked is that if we had apprehended the robber, and then we had to insist, so they took a record of the incident. Was in Mexico City for a work assignment. Had just gone to dinner in the Zona Rosa, pink zone. Walking back to the hotel I saw a hit and run. A pedestrian was thrown through the air and flung to the ground. A lot of people witnessed this and an ambulance was called. The ambulance came screaming around the corner, going really fast, and hit another pedestrian, who then was thrown through the air and flung to the ground. It was awful. This sounds like a dark comedic sketch. Back in 1978 when I was 10, I went to Jamaica with my mom. One morning after coming out of the British Embassy, I saw 4 baby mongoose in a rain gully about 5 feet deep behind where we were waiting for a bus. I thought they were adorable and started feeding them by throwing them biscuits. Some guy saw me doing that, walked over and dropped a large brick on them, killing them instantly. I was pretty inconsolable for several hours. Lived in Saudi Arabia as a kid for a few years. Public beheading was pretty fricked up. Saw a few dead bodies on the street in a couple places in SE Asia. Pedestrians just walked over or around them. I just missed a beheading in Alcoba back in 81 feet. I had a knife pulled on me in Germany by a couple of sea kids. And in Thailand a tourist was smoking a joint on the police started beating the crap out of him. Had an officer holding each arm and leg while another just kept jumping as high as he could and dropping knees onto the man's face. He started convulsing and foaming at the mouth, so they threw him in the back of the police van and drove away. Sheep wearing plastic bags from the local store tied across their butt. Turned out to be sheep birth control. Location: Faroe Islands in the mid-90s. That's hilarious. I unknowingly booked a hotel a block from the red light district in Paris. Once I figured that out, I tried not to return too late to my room. The next morning I was so energized and enthused to begin my vacation I threw open my window to greet the day, only to see the police scraping someone off the road. I wasn't that high up, so it was the first time I saw something so grisly. It was definitely murder. They definitely used a knife. I was walking through a forest in central France when I came across a group of old-style horse-drawn gypsy caravans in a clearing. They were obviously very old and looked like they had just been abandoned. There was a very eerie, unsettling feel to the place, so I took a few photos and moved on. A couple of days later I was talking to an old guy in the village and he explained that the gypsies had been dragged from their wagons and murdered by the invading Nazis during World War II. Out of respect, the surviving gypsies in the region just left the caravans where they were. In Cambodia I got a ride from the airport to my hostel on a motorcycle. It became clear the driver was drunk. Once there I was offered a child prostitute while walking down the street. The next day at the killing fields, bones had unearthed themselves due to a recent rain. That was all in the first 24 hours. Not going back to Cambodia. The next day at the killing fields, bones had unearthed themselves due to a recent rain. That's one of the things I remember as well. I absolutely loved Cambodia, though, and can't wait to go back. Angkor Wat was incredible. Was in Serbia and my colleague I was there with, and I had rented a car to go explore the beautiful country. We followed Google Maps but end up on a dirt road in some small village-like area and then had to make a turn. It was heavily raining and we got the car stuck. We couldn't get it unstuck on our own, so we wanted to ask for help, and as we approached the first nearby house a large dog came running out barking loudly and an elderly looking man came out with a rifle yelling at us in Serbian. We decided next house was a better bet and they were the kindest people on earth. We told them that we had tried the other house with no luck and they told us we were lucky to be alive. Apparently the man had a reputation but they didn't want to further into details. No more dirt roads for me, thanks. It is always good to get a local tour guide when moving around in a foreign country. This isn't the most fricked up thing, but I remember walking down the street in Cusco and seeing a cute street dog playing with a plush toy and throwing it in the air. When I got closer the dog's mouth was bloody and I realized it was eating a guinea pig. Judging by my Facebook comments when I posted the picture, me eating a guinea pig in Cusco was the most fricked up thing a lot of people had seen. When we were in Paris, a lady pickpocketed my dad on the subway. Thing is, he felt her bump him after getting on the wrong direction on the train. So he spun and grabbed her wrist and shouted, "Give me back my wallet." She threw it down with the other hand and bolted. I got pickpocketed by an old lady in Ireland. She grabbed my butt while trying to grab my phone. I turned around and took a photo of her with my camera and she ran off. I ended up seeing her later in a crowd trying again. Probably underage prostitutes. Also, a guy picking up a cat by its hind legs, swinging it up above his head like a kettlebell, and then smacking it down in the pavement with full force. Another thing, pig heads on display at a food market when I was a kid. I still remember their closed eyes and the flies buzzing around them. It's not the worst thing, but it kind of got to me. I saw some guy get beaten and dragged away in front of club in Spain. It made me so uncomfortable and I didn't know what to do. Then some people who were with the beating the guy up party came over and talked to us for a while. I think because they could tell I was watching them. The French people I was with didn't bat an eye. Just said, "Girl, it happens all the time." My mum was on one of the Spanish islands a few years ago for a family member's hen party and she saw a guy get thrown out of club by a bouncer and bang his head on the floor and then a pool of blood formed. She was so traumatized that she came home the next day. She didn't find out what happened to the guy. In St. Martian in the 90s saw a guy from the nudist beach wander over to a payphone and make a call. Always wondered where he kept his change. Prison wallet. I was in Rio de Janeiro in a taxi with a friend. We stopped at a stop sign at a busy intersection and two prostitutes were soliciting themselves. Now, this all happened very quickly, but neither my friend nor I said anything, but the taxi driver told them to get lost. They kept soliciting themselves. The taxi driver told us not to open the doors or windows. The prostitutes pulled out knives and started slashing the taxi. The taxi driver pulled out in front of traffic to get away from the situation. But thankfully we didn't get into a car accident. In Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, my ex-girlfriend and I hired a driver. We went to a marketplace and the driver informed us it wasn't the safest place, so he would walk a few meters behind us and observe. Not 5 minutes in and he grabbed us by the arms and said, "Don't turn around. Don't react. I'm going to guide us out." After getting into the car, we asked what was up. It took several times of asking until he finally said that there was a group of older boys following us with knives and he wouldn't say anything else. In Jerusalem myself, a friend, and family experienced a situation that only 4 of us and the tour guide could understand. There was an announcement in Hebrew at the Wailing Wall that a backpack was left unattended. No one was allowed to enter or leave until the bomb squad came and inspected it. Turned out to be a backpack a kid left on accident, but the majority of our group had no clue what was happening until after it was all over. So many people underestimate PNG. The place is a death trap waiting for any foreigner from a Western country. My father went scuba diving there once for work and a dude was murdered in the apartment next to him. 6-year-old kid selling sweets on the streets in Brazil. Spent some time talking to him. His parents had convinced him that school was for suckers and that he wouldn't like it. So sad to see. This kid was full of charisma, well spoken and clearly intelligent even though he couldn't read or write. Such a waste of potential. Really hope he gets an education at some point and gets to sow something meaningful with his life. Saw a naked man taking a bath in a public park fountain. The water was spewing out the top and cascading down into the basin below where the guy was blissfully unaware of people watching him as he bathed. Honestly, that dude has the right idea. Taking a bath in a fountain sounds great. I was held against my will in a brothel somewhere in the Caucasus. I'm a guy and I was there ostensibly as a customer but more like brought by people I barely knew as a sign of hospitality despite my protests. They left me there with armed guards patrolling the grounds. Since I didn't speak the same language as them, when I tried to leave they corralled me back, guns drawn. Several hours later, the people that brought me collected me and wanted a detailed account of how it went. Thankfully I thought ahead enough to ruffle my clothes and hair. The prostitute insisted I take her number and call her if I wanted to hang out. Yeah, those people were paid to bring you there. Cab drivers are in on this one sometimes too. I was visiting the Acropolis in Athens and saw a bunch of kids collecting stone pottery fragments to take home. I also saw a crack baggie in the Acropolis itself. Day 1 of our honeymoon, getting off the subway in NYC, looking up at the huge buildings outside, message in awe of how cool everything was. Look down and see a homeless chap crapping in a carrier bag in the middle of the busy street. No one bats an eyelid. Welcome to the Big Apple. Went to NYC Christmas 2019. Came out of the subway to a similar scene. Also a guy on the subway asking to do handstands for $1. NYC was wild. Seen a lot of pretty strange and alarming things, but for some reason one that really stands out is Garbage City in Cairo, Egypt. A lot of Cairo is pretty run down. Many people living in houses and homes that are missing walls and roofs with garbage and filth all over the place. But Garbage City was something else. Kids, women, grandparents, everyone was sorting through massive piles of trash outside of their homes so they could scrape together a living. Those with babies would have them laying on top of the mounds of filth while they worked. Seeing the babies and children and on the trash really stuck with me for some reason. It doesn't take away the validity of the issues of wage stagnation or wealth inequality in the States, but frick does it make me feel grateful for my ticket in the birth lottery. On a school skiing trip in Italy, a kid lost control and missed hitting another person. The instructor goes over to him and full force slapped him. We heard the slap from the top of the slope. It left a red mark for the rest of the day. The kid who lost control was only 14 years old. I just remembered more. When he complained to the teachers, they did nothing about it. Also, on the way back from the trip at the ferry, he refused to show his face and said to one of his friends in front of an officer, "I hope they don't find it." He had nothing on him and delayed us by an hour. Frick you, Kevin. As someone who has a language teacher from Italy, what you're describing doesn't sound all that far-fetched. When I was 10, we went on holiday to Turkey. My idea of a holiday has always been relaxing in and around the pool somewhere hot, but my parents are sightseers, so we ended up going to visit the ruins of an amphitheater. I remember finding a newborn puppy, no more than 2 or 3 days old, laying in the shade of one of the broken pillars. He was weak and dehydrated and covered in dirt and little maggoty wriggly things. I went to a nearby cafe set up to take advantage of the tourism around the amphitheater to get him some water, but he was too weak to drink it. I couldn't understand why no one was helping him, and we eventually left him there. It's been 11 years. I've since raised my own dog from puppy to senior, but when I close my eyes I can still see that newborn puppy dying in the midday sun. You have a kind heart. In Amsterdam, I was walking down a street with my friends when a guy just comes flying through a glass door. Obviously glass everywhere, followed by the owner of the kebab shop stepping out of the broken glass door threatening the guy with a kebab slicer. I saw a guy kill himself by slicing his own throat open with a box cutter during a political protest, so definitely that. Not another country, but I went cliff jumping in Oahu, about 30-35 feet, and there was a 4 or 5-year-old kid standing at the edge of the rock, crying because he didn't want to jump. His dad was forcefully shouting at him that he could do it. "Do you want me to push you? Jump. Don't be afraid, boy." The kid kept full on tantrum crying, so the dad picked him up screaming and then just threw him off. He spun in the air and definitely didn't land feet first, and surfaced still screaming. Felt so bad for the kid. I was zookeeping in New Zealand. A tour group of primarily people of Asian descent was walking through a key exhibit. After telling them keas are incredibly endangered, one of the men asked how much it would cost to shoot one of our birds since he wanted one before they were gone. Username checks out. In Thailand, saw a mother riding a motorcycle with 3 newborn babies with no helmets. They were strapped onto her with blankets. It seems like every motor scooter I saw in Thailand had a minimum of 3 people on it. I was on a business trip, but had a couple days at the end of the trip for myself in New Delhi, India. Somehow, I got to talking with the bartender at my hotel about my hobby of keeping reef aquariums and that I was designing a new system. He told me about an entire street in New Delhi where every shop sells nothing but various pumps. Pumps of all kinds and very cheap. Pumps for reef tanks can push $1,000, so I thought I would have a look. Besides, I had been wanting to try out New Delhi's metro system, and there was a metro station right near Pump Street, so I hop on the metro. Very nice, actually, highly recommended, and exit the station on Pump Street. Sure enough, hundreds of pump stores line one entire side of the street, but then I noticed the other side of the street. It was lined with hundreds of brothels. 4-5 stories high. Every window had women and or girls hanging out of them. On the sidewalk outside, young boys, 7-10-year-olds, ran around pimping their particular whorehouses. As a 6 feet 3 inches Caucasian, I was an instant target. Mister, you want girl?" And then the kid would start yelling prices, each trying to underbid the kid next to him. Walking away didn't matter. They followed until a cop wielding a large stick chased them off. That's where I learned the price of a female human being on that street. 200 rupees. A bottle of beer at my hotel was 800 rupees. Update. So I did some googling last night. The place I referred to as Pump Street is actually named GB Road, Gaston Bastion Road. While the photos online are as I remember it, what those don't portray is the smell. A weird mixture of marijuana smoke, diesel exhaust and pee. Kinda like patchouli. And no, I did not end up buying any pumps. Way too much chaos to study the pump curves and calculate flow rates for some completely unknown machine. So I wandered around for a while, utterly gobsmacked. I watched a group of men playing a very loud and aggressive game of cards on the ground outside one of the shops. They were betting money, cigarettes, shoes, half-eaten food, anything with the slightest value was getting pushed into the center of this card game as a wager. That's when the funniest crap I've ever seen happened. The yelling and betting was getting the attention of bystanders and a small crowd of locals began to watch. It was like an ultra low budget World Series of Poker. That's when one of the card players pulls off his artificial leg and slams it into the middle of the pile of wagers. All and everyone showed their cards by slamming them down on the ground and shouting. Apparently the youngest kid in the game had the best hand. He immediately snatched up the cash and the leg, leaving the other wagers, then took off down an alley. I managed to get a photo of the card game without drawing any attention to myself. Around 14 years ago I was traveling through Syria with my family and I took my 16-year-old younger brother into a nightclub in Damascus during the day. The guy outside advertised dancing girls and my brother really wanted to go inside. I figured it would be pretty innocent, Sharia law and all that. We're from New Zealand and hadn't been there long. We had been warned that all the women would be covered up. Well, we walk into the club and two of the walls are lined, shoulder to shoulder, with scantily clad women. The dude we paid at the front sits us down and gets us a drink. Then he asks us what type of girl we want and I realize I have misunderstood the situation. My younger brother orders a Russian girl who comes and chats to us briefly. At this point my gauge is that the girls have been trafficked and they were not just there to dance. So, I tell my brother we need to leave and we make for the exit while I shout misunderstanding over and over. The bouncer lets us pass and we walk back out into the quiet street. Thankfully, it was an anticlimactic ending. For us anyway. I still wonder what those poor girls had been through. Another contender for most fricked up thing I've seen traveling was in Nairobi, Kenya, where a child of 5 or 6 years old led us through a short tour of the alleys he lived in. The poor little kid was high as a kite on sniffing glue and everyone he was living around was also off their face. In Khartoum I saw some people living on the side of the street in very poor states of health. Most were actually in decent health, but a few of the worst off ones seemed to be just kind of slowly dying. That sucked. But I lived there 6 months and after a few weeks you become completely numb to it, which is quite scary. I talked to two of the locals about this and they somehow didn't even realize people were dying on the side of the street. Like, they lived there but somehow hadn't even noticed. They were just part of the scenery. I actually walked them to the window and pointed down to the street where there was a dude in quite poor health and they seemed somehow surprised, despite it being a normal sight. Crazy what you can get accustomed to and tune out. I'd like to be at a party with you and listen to all of your stories. I was driving in a car in Mexico with a local friend, in a condition we clearly should not be driving in, ran a red light, got stopped by the police. I already said my prayers, texted my mom that I am going to jail as I had no money for a bribe on me. Friend is extremely rude to the officer, which frightens me even more. He then proceeds to call someone and hands the phone to the police officer who becomes pale and returns the phone. He goes on apologizing for stopping us and wishing a good night. As we drive off my friend says, you know the get out of jail card in Monopoly? My dad is the police chief here. I own that card. It was such a casual way of showing that law doesn't exist in that country for some, and the longer you think about it the scarier it becomes. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.